Welcome back to HOA Nightmares, the show where we pull back the curtain on the often terrifying world of homeowners associations, uncovering the hidden abuses of power that can turn a dream home into a living hell.
And today we're diving deep into a story that truly defines the word overreach. It's about an HOA president who, through cunning and manipulation, transformed her community into her own personal empire, funded entirely by the unsuspecting residents.
We're talking about Brenda the Benevolent Peterson, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. From the outside, Willow Creek was, by all appearances, a suburban paradise. Manicured lawns, perfectly aligned mailboxes, pristine common areas, a real picture of peace and community.
But beneath that glossy, picture-perfect surface, Brenda was slowly, methodically consolidating power and, far more importantly, money. And it wasn't her money. It was the residents' hard-earned dues, their investments in their homes, and their community.
It started subtly, as these things often do, little changes here and there that seemed innocuous, even beneficial on the surface. A new landscaper, a different pool cleaning service, an updated security system. Brenda always had a plausible reason, always had a disarmingly warm smile, and a knack for presenting these changes as for the good of the community.
But residents like Mark and Sarah Jenkins, who had lived in Willow Creek for over 20 years, saw patterns emerging. They remember the good old days when HOA meetings were about potlucks and minor beautification projects. Now, every new vendor, every new project seemed to be significantly more expensive than the last. And curiously, they always seemed to be companies owned by Brenda's cousin, or a friend from our exclusive golf club, or someone else with a clear but unspoken connection to her.
Mark, a sharp retired accountant with an eye for detail, began to feel a nagging unease. He prided himself on his meticulous record-keeping, and the HOA's finances seemed increasingly opaque. He started making polite inquiries. He requested the financial records, the detailed vendor contracts, the meeting minutes from executive sessions.
And that's when he hit his first significant roadblock. Brenda's response initially was smooth as silk. "Oh, Mark, we're just so busy with all these wonderful community improvements. The records are being audited. You know how it is. So much paperwork, so much to organize." A polite brush-off that became increasingly less polite and more evasive with each subsequent request.
This stonewalling tactic was Brenda's hallmark. As one longtime resident, who wished to remain anonymous, later put it, it was like trying to get blood from a stone. She'd smile, make a vague promise, and then nothing. Absolutely nothing. It was like dealing with a brick wall wrapped in velvet.
While Mark was being politely rebuffed, Brenda was busy pushing through her grand pet project, the Willow Creek Community Wellness Hub. On paper, it sounded revolutionary. A communal garden, a serene meditation space, perhaps even a small outdoor yoga platform. It was presented as the future of community living, a jewel in Willow Creek's crown.
But the proposed budget for this hub was astronomical. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars for what amounted to, on the blueprint, a patch of land, some decorative rocks, and a few benches. And almost predictably, guess who secured the lucrative construction contract? Brenda's brother-in-law's company, Green Oasis Creations, a company with literally no prior experience in large-scale landscaping or construction, their previous work being limited to small residential lawn care.
Residents were quite rightly outraged. The initial town hall meetings, once orderly affairs, quickly devolved into shouting matches. People questioned the necessity of the project, the exorbitant cost, and most critically, the questionable choice of contractor. Brenda's response? A dismissive wave of the hand, a condescending sigh, and a quote that eerily echoes the sentiment of one of our past interviewees. "Some people just don't understand the vision. Progress isn't cheap, and true visionaries are often misunderstood."
And that's when the retaliation began. Not just subtle cold shoulders, but direct, punitive measures. If you dared to speak up at a meeting, if you voiced dissent, or even a simple question, you might suddenly find an official-looking notice on your door within days.
It could be about your lawn being 2 inches too tall according to newly precise guidelines, or your garbage cans being visible from the street, infractions that had never been enforced in the decades prior. The fines started appearing for minute violations, sometimes hundreds of dollars for something that was previously ignored or handled with a friendly reminder.
Sarah Jenkins, a passionate gardener, received a staggering $500 fine because her prize-winning rosebush, a magnificent specimen she had nurtured for over a decade, was suddenly deemed not in compliance with the new landscaping guidelines for floral diversity. The irony was that the new guidelines were so vague they could be interpreted to apply to almost anything.
Meanwhile, Brenda's favorite residents, those who blindly supported her, perhaps out of fear, or those who might have even benefited from her various schemes, seemed entirely immune to these sudden draconian rule enforcements. Their overgrown hedges, their peeling paint, their visibly overflowing garbage cans, perfectly acceptable, never warranting a single fine or even a polite word. It was a clear demonstration of the saying, "The rules are for thee, not for me."
Mark and Sarah knew deep in their gut something was profoundly wrong. This wasn't just typical HOA nitpicking. This was targeted harassment, a weaponization of the bylaws. They started talking to other residents, quietly at first, during dog walks, at the community mailbox, then more openly, gathering at each other's homes for hushed conversations.
They quickly discovered a chilling pattern. Others had been hit with questionable fines. Others had their requests for financial transparency ignored. They heard stories of residents being threatened with liens on their homes for minor infractions, all while Brenda pushed through increasingly expensive and questionable projects.
It was elderly old Mr. Henderson, whose mobility scooter was his lifeline, suddenly fined his designated long-standing parking spot for the scooter in the community garage, repurposed for HOA storage. This forced him to park his scooter far away, making his daily life immeasurably harder. A clear inconvenience, designed purely to assert dominance, a tactic straight out of the petty dictator playbook.
The more they dug, the more they found. The community garden was mostly a patch of weeds. The meditation space was little more than a single wobbly bench, clearly made with cheap materials despite the astronomical budget line item. The real money, the money residents paid diligently every month, was disappearing into inflated invoices and murky administrative fees paid directly to Brenda's newly formed consulting firm, a firm that conveniently appeared on paper just as the Willow Creek Community Wellness Hub project began.
The paper trail, once elusive, slowly began to solidify. Invoices showed Brenda's brother-in-law's company billing for top-tier, luxury equipment and materials that were demonstrably never delivered to Willow Creek. Receipts for HOA office supplies mysteriously matched purchases from high-end boutiques, luxury travel agencies, and even a boat dealership.
It was Chloe, a new resident and a brilliant data analyst who truly blew the lid off. She had a knack for digging through complex data. When Brenda denied her request for detailed financial statements, Chloe, sensing foul play, remembered seeing a box of old HOA documents being thrown out by a maintenance worker. She managed to rescue a copy of the original Willow Creek Community Wellness Hub proposal from a disgruntled former HOA secretary who had quietly kept her own unofficial records.
The proposed cost on that original, legitimate document was less than a third of what Brenda had pushed through. The difference? Millions of dollars, a vast sum that seemed to vanish into thin air, or rather into Brenda's cleverly structured financial shell game. Armed with this undeniable proof, the original proposal, the inflated invoices, the dubious consulting firm payments, Mark, Sarah, Chloe, and a rapidly growing coalition of outraged residents knew they had to act. They decided to call for an emergency general meeting, a drastic step that required significant resident signatures.
Brenda predictably tried every trick in the book to shut it down. She claimed the meeting was not properly convened, that the residents were spreading dangerous misinformation, and even brazenly threatened immediate legal action against those who dared to sign the petition or speak out. She called the police, alleging harassment, but the officers, seeing a civil dispute, simply observed.
The emergency meeting itself was a true kangaroo court scenario, orchestrated by Brenda to maintain control. She packed the front rows with her loyalists, tried to limit debate, cut off microphones mid-sentence, and even attempted to have security physically remove a resident who dared to wave a copy of one of the fraudulent invoices, a piece of damning evidence in plain sight.
But Brenda had underestimated the unity and resolve of a community pushed to its breaking point. Word had spread like wildfire, not just through direct communication, but through local social media groups, and even a few concerned local journalists who started asking questions.
Even residents who had been indifferent or too afraid to speak up before were now seeing the blatant corruption with their own eyes, the sheer audacity of Brenda's schemes, the clear evidence of her enriching herself at the community's expense was undeniable. Her desperate attempts to silence dissent only fueled the flames of rebellion.
Faced with a full-blown uprising and with credible legal threats from an increasing number of residents who had now pooled their resources for a formidable lawyer, Brenda's carefully constructed empire began to crack, then crumble. The threat of a class action lawsuit loomed large.
The pressure became unbearable. An independent forensic audit was finally forced through, not by Brenda, but by a court order, revealing a sophisticated web of deceit, grossly inflated contracts, fictitious companies, and direct payments to Brenda's personal accounts, all disguised as legitimate HOA expenses.
It showed millions of dollars diverted from community funds over several years, money that should have gone to maintaining the community's infrastructure to improving amenities for everyone, was instead funding Brenda's increasingly lavish lifestyle, from exotic vacations to luxury goods, all at the expense of her unsuspecting neighbors.
The fallout was swift and decisive. Brenda Peterson, stripped of her power and facing criminal fraud charges, resigned from the HOA board in disgrace, narrowly avoiding a harsher sentence by agreeing to a substantial, albeit partial, restitution payment, a fraction of what she had stolen. The community also discovered she had quietly sold her own home in Willow Creek just weeks before the scandal broke, indicating she might have been planning her escape.
The community of Willow Creek then embarked on the long, difficult, but ultimately rewarding process of healing. They elected a new, transparent board comprised of dedicated, honest residents. They meticulously revised their bylaws to prevent future abuses, implementing strict financial oversight protocols, and put systems in place to ensure true accountability and regular independent audits.
It was a harsh lesson in vigilance, a stark reminder that even in seemingly idyllic communities, unchecked power can corrupt absolutely. The residents of Willow Creek learned that the price of freedom from tyranny is eternal vigilance, especially when it comes to the people managing your community.
The story of Brenda Benevolent Peterson serves as a powerful cautionary tale. Always know where your HOA dues are going. Always question questionable decisions. And never, ever underestimate the power of a united community to fight back against overreach, corruption, and those who seek to turn communal trust into personal gain.
That's all for this episode of HOA Nightmares. Join us next time for more shocking stories from the front lines of community living, where the fight for peace and property rights is an ongoing battle.